everyone's timeline for succeeding is going to be different. If you're passionate about the art that you are creating, you just have to keep doing it. It might break for you or it might not. And you have to also be comfortable with that too. You have to be comfortable knowing that you might be pursuing this art form your whole life and never get your break. But are you still finding something fun with it? Are you still happy doing it?
Hello and welcome to the Beautiful Work Podcast. I'm your host, Dan Krikorian. Each episode, we feature a special guest from all walks of life, and we ask them to explore the ins and outs, the ups and downs, the triumphs and the trials of their chosen field. Writers, musicians, coaches, business owners, athletes, and everything in between. We peel back the curtain to hear their stories, to walk their paths, to find out how they breathe life into their beautiful work. Hey everybody, thanks so much for tuning in to this edition of the Beautiful Work Podcast. We have a fantastic show today. I'm so excited to welcome Alicia Robbins to the show. We will get to her and her interview in just a moment. Before we do, if you could please subscribe and leave a rating and a comment wherever you happen to be listening to the show. It really does help other people continue to find these types of podcasts, and also share it and pass it along with those that you think might be interested. We have a fantastic listening audience, and it continues to grow episode after episode, and I thank you guys who have been sharing it and passing it along. It's a lot of fun to put these together, and your share or your help with that means a lot, so thank you. Quickly, I have my 6th record coming out called Alive in Costa Mesa. It is a live record from last year. We were at the Orange County Fair for 5 straight nights. And so you can head to dankrikorian.com or beautifulworkpodcast.com and sign up for our newsletter with that. And that release is coming quite soon, depending on when you are listening to it. It is coming in the summer of 2020. So, on to our show. Alicia Robbins is a LA-based director of photography, and she is the 2018 Emerging Cinematographer Award recipient for her work on Internet Gangsters. She is the current full-time alternating director of photography for ABC's hit show Grey's Anatomy, and she's also served in other roles for shows such as For the People, and worked on The Wedding Invitation, a feature film, as well as many, many other projects. She is here today to share her story, her growth and process throughout her career, and it's just a fantastic interview. And so, without further ado, let's get to the show. Usually when I have a guest on, I'm not as concerned about how my background on Zoom looks as far as lighting and the setup of the room. But when you have a director of photography coming on your podcast, all of a sudden I'm like, wait, is that lit well, or should I bring it to the forefront?
You look great.
Thank you. This is mostly just
nice, clean background. It looks good.
Thank you. Yeah, mostly just natural light coming in through my window, but
that's what I have too.
Looks great.
It's sometimes the best.
Well, thanks so much for coming on, for joining me. And I'm really excited to talk to you about all different aspects of your career and the creative process and things that you do. And we will get to that stuff in a second. But I'd like, if you could for a second, I'd like to go back. And this is, I believe, sometime when you're 18, 19 in the summertime. And you get an opportunity back in Birmingham, Alabama, to work on a set with what would become a very famous cinematographer. Can you talk about that experience and what that opportunity was, and then maybe how it kind of jump-started your career?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is funny about that summer because I thought that I was going to spend that summer in Los Angeles. When I was at Vanderbilt, I was trying to go to Los Angeles in between semesters because I thought maybe I wanted to do actually something with communications or public speaking, maybe film. I wasn't quite sure. And the previous year, I had been actually Universal Studios tour guide in Los Angeles. And so I thought, oh, the next summer I might do something similar, or maybe try to get behind the scenes of something, maybe newscasting or whatever. But opportunities just didn't seem to be happening to go to Los Angeles again that next summer. And then lo and behold, a film comes through Birmingham, Alabama, which is really unheard of. A lot of productions aren't shooting in Birmingham. They go to Atlanta, New Orleans, somewhere else. And my sister, who was already living in Los Angeles at the time, she told me, she said, call the production office, tell them you want to be a production assistant. I'm like, okay, that's what I'll do. And so I called the production office, told them I wanted to be a production assistant, and got the interview and got the job. And I think that one of the craziest things about it, though, was learning what the hours were of working on a film. I had no idea that it was going to be so long and grueling. My first day there, our call time was like 7 a.m. And I had told my parents, oh, don't worry, I'll be home by like 4 o'clock or something. I mean, if it's 7 a.m., then goodness gracious, how long are they going to keep us?
Yeah.
And I remember we didn't wrap until like 7 o'clock at night. And I got home and my parents were a little worried. This before cell phones, so I couldn't text them. And I said, I think that it's going to be like this every day. It's going to be 12 to 14 hours. And so that was my first shock of the film industry, was that is long hours. But I knew that this was something that I wanted to be involved in, because at the same time, I was still doing an internship with a company that was in line with what I was studying at Vanderbilt, which was communications. And that internship, I was working in an office. I had my own cubicle, writing articles, doing stories, very fascinating work. And I did that internship 1 day a week while I was on the film 4 days a week. And I swear, going into that cubicle on that one day just about killed me. It was only a 8 to 10 hour day. And I was just looking at the clock constantly. I just could not stand just being in a cubicle working and writing articles. And I looked forward to going back to set, even though I knew it was going to be a 14-hour day. And from that, when I was on set, I was observing everyone. I was watching what they were doing, trying to figure out what their jobs really entailed. And the one that really stood out to me was the director of photography. And it happened to be Wally Pfister, who is an Academy Award winning cinematographer now also director. But at the time, he was not a famous DP yet. And just watching him work, I wasn't quite sure exactly what he was doing, but he just seemed like a magician, just the way that he pulled things together and made it come together visually. And I remember at the end of the production at our wrap party, I talked to Wally and I asked him, I said, I'm really fascinated with this director of photography position. Do you have advice for me? What can I do to maybe pursue this? And he told me if there was any chance of me trying to applying to AFI, that's where he'd gone, was American Film Institute for cinematography. He said it was a great program, and after I graduated from Vanderbilt, I should definitely look into going there, because that's what helped him with his career. And that's actually what I did. I followed that advice. So
it's such an amazing story too, because I think I think I had read that you were supposed to go back to LA that summer, but nothing quite worked out to where you were going to go back. And so you ended up staying in Alabama, and lo and behold, here comes, which you didn't know at the time, but becomes, a jumping off point for you.
Yeah, I know. Who knows what would have happened if I'd actually gone back to Los Angeles, the heart of the film industry.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Yeah, your big break came when you weren't
yeah,
there. Yeah.
yeah.
So,
So yeah, it was crazy. It was fun.
do you do you remember like being on that set and what the feeling was that was running through you that you made you know this is what I want to do? Because I think when you're in a career that you don't want to be in. I mean, everybody can feel that. And I think you talking about writing for 8 to 10 hours a day at a desk job, I can relate to that. I was in the mutual fund business for 2 years before I jumped off to all these things. And I can just remember just looking at the clock and every second felt like 10 hours before 5 o'clock. But then when I got to the things that I do now that I love, time just flew. And I was just fully involved in what I was doing. Do you remember that feeling or something similar to that being on set that first time?
Yeah, I do. And it wasn't even really the first day because it was funny because the first day on that set, it was horrible because they actually had me blocking traffic. So I was blocking traffic about 2 blocks away from the actual set. So I didn't get to see anything that was actually going on. So all I knew was that
Okay.
when I heard rolling on the walkie, I needed to make sure that a car didn't pass. And then when it was cut, I could let them go through. So that was, I'm like, okay, I guess this is what I'm doing. But then finally, once I was a PA that was closer to set and I could actually run items into set if someone called for them, I would linger a little
Uh-huh.
bit longer than I probably was supposed to. Um,
Yeah.
but I would walk in and I would see the dollies and the cameras sitting on the dollies and people operating the cameras and there would be atmosphere with smoke in the air. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is like the coolest thing ever. It just seemed cool. And it felt like, and watching Wally too, he seemed like a rock star to me. He was just a rock star. Just the way that he commanded the set and just seemed to
Hmm.
have control over the set. But he was such a nice guy about it and just collaborative. And you can tell that he was trying to serve the director's vision and talking to it. It was just amazing. I'm like, wow, that looks like a really cool job to have.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
yeah, it wasn't right away. When they had me blocking traffic, I was miserable.
Well, that's such a great lesson. You know, I teach at Chapman, and all these graduating seniors, they want to go on and, like all of us, be successful. And I think they have, some delusions of grandeur of thinking they're going to jump into this job right away. And to hear someone like yourself talk about, your first job is blocking traffic, and now you're at where you're at is refreshing to say the least.
Yeah, you have to do the grunt work.
You do. You got to put in your hours. Well, I'm glad for you that it worked out the way it did because, you've done such amazing work and are, just getting started on so much stuff. I guess maybe now would be a quick pause for those that are listening that maybe aren't entirely sure what your job description does on a set. Maybe you could just briefly explain, because you'd be better than me doing this, what it is that director of photography does day to day on a set.
Right, right. And that is always a really difficult question to answer because there are so many aspects to being a DP, and it changes from set to set. It really does. I mean, sometimes your role is it, it, you could be doing a lot more on set than other sets. It really depends. But in general, a director of photography in many ways is like a photographer, except with moving image. And we're in charge of essentially the look of the frame that we're getting. So the movement of the camera, the lenses that you choose to put on the camera, how you light the scene, how the camera moves in relation to the blocking of the actors. Now, even though we're in charge of those things, that is still a collaboration with the director, making sure that we're serving the director's vision of what they want to see and how they've blocked the actors, how we're moving the camera with that. And it's a discussion. Also, it's a collaboration with the production designer the colors that the production designer has decided to paint the walls, the art pieces that they're putting in, how does that affect the framing? How does that affect the lens choices that we are using? So there's so many factors that go into it. And then when you're actually on set working, it really is a people management job, because when you watch a director of photography on set, and this kind of goes back to when I was on Rustin watching Wally, it was a little confusing. I couldn't quite tell. I could tell that he was in charge of the visual aspect of the film, but I couldn't quite figure out the magic that he was doing that made it all come together. And it is that collaboration with the gaffer, who is also in charge of the lighting, the camera operators who are physically behind the camera, moving the camera. And I think that's where a lot of people get confused, is they think that the camera operator, the person who's physically moving the camera, is the director of photography. Sometimes that's the case, but that isn't always the case. For me, I always have camera operators so that I can sit behind monitors, watch the frames with the director, and have those discussions side by side with the director. And a lot of times when I'm working these days, I have more than one camera. So I wouldn't want to have my eye in one camera and not be able to see the frame of what the other camera operator is shooting. But yeah, we're in charge of the visual design of the film or TV show. I mean, that's really a broad term.
Sure.
What it is that we do.
Thank you. Yeah, but for the layperson that, has just, has no idea about anything, that's a nice base point, and we can get into the weeds more as we weave through the conversation. So thank you. And I also wanted to dive in a little bit on your experience at AFI, because you mentioned how Wally had mentioned that would be a good path, and it's the path you ended up taking. And can you talk about that experience and what you learned there, and why it was so good for your career as a jumping off point?
Yeah. I did. So I went to AFI right out of undergrad, which is unusual. Sometimes people decide to go work for a little while before they go to a grad program. I knew I wanted to go to a grad program right away. So whether or not I was going to get into one was also a question, because I applied to several of them, and AFI was actually the one that I got into. And I was surprised by that, because it is a difficult program to get into. But I believe that because I went right out of undergrad and I hadn't had work experience on set as a director of photography yet, I was really malleable, I think, with the studies there. And we had some really amazing professors there. Actually, you have Bill Dill now at Chapman University. So
Okay.
he was my main cinematography professor when I was at AFI. So he was still at AFI full time. And between him and Stephen Lighthill, I mean, they're just masters in cinematography, and to have them as guides into the career was, I couldn't ask for a better learning environment. And I do remember one thing that Bill Dill had told me when I first got to AFI, because it was a little intimidating being around other cinematographers who had been working in the field as either camera assistants or DPs. I felt like I was really behind when it came to the technical aspects of knowing camera, because there were some students that were asking questions that they sounded like they were speaking a foreign language. I did not know what they were talking about at all. And I remember being a little intimidated by that. And this was very early in that first year at AFI, and I went up to Bill after one of the classes because I felt like I didn't understand anything that was being talked about in that class. And this was before we had shot our first project. And I told Bill, I said, I'm not sure if this is right for me. I'm not understanding anything that people are talking about. I have a lot to catch up on. And he said, don't worry about the technical. You will get that. The technical is the easy part. It's the heart that's important. As long as you have that, if you have the passion for it, you're going to be fine. He said, you will get the technical. Don't worry about it. Forget what they're asking in
Sure.
class. And I left that class going, wow, I've never had a teacher say that before. And so that's kind of how I approached it. I stopped worrying about the technical so much, started just doing what I felt was right, or even just playing with the camera. Like, what if it did this? Or what if it did that? What if I stuck the light here? Who cares? Let's see what happens.
Yeah.
And my first project at AFI was actually really good. And then, yeah, he was absolutely right. The technical came later. But I do feel like a lot of the relationships that I made out of AFI have helped my career. To this day, I do keep in touch with a lot of the people that I graduated with from AFI. And I just felt like it was a good jumping off point for getting into the industry and at least having a pretty solid knowledge of how to frame a piece, how to tell a story cinematically. I already had those tools to work on some decent projects right after I graduated. And I'm not really sure if I would have had that that fast if I had just started to try to work in the industry. So
Sure.
I'm really happy that I had that undergrad degree. And also just having a teacher that said, don't concentrate on the technical. Even though he's such a technical professor, he was like, forget about it.
Sure. 100%. Yeah. And I can relate to that a little bit in my, the music world where, sometimes you can get caught up on all the gadgets and the sounds and, does this sound right or does that sound right? And at the end of the day, it's like, well, is this a good song or not? Do you think people will feel something from this? And if they do, then all that stuff can get worked out down the line. But you got to start with the soul of the song first. Yep. And one of the other things that, I relate to a lot with music that I see what you do, and I've heard you talk about and write about, is the art of telling a story within what you do. And so can you talk a little bit about why storytelling is so important to your line of work, and then how someone like yourself tries to bring that into your work from your angle?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. If you're not serving the story visually through the cinematography, the story that director is trying to tell is going to fall apart. It's not going to work. And I mean, really, it takes years and years and years to understand why a certain way a camera is moving gives a certain feeling, why a certain lens size gives one feeling versus another. A light coming from a particular direction has one story element to it versus if you were having it coming from the opposite direction. So all of these are things that you can learn through just practice in cinematography. It is also it is a feeling too. Mm-hmm. But if you don't serve the story in the way that you've composed a shot or moving the camera, then that tone of what the director is trying to get out of the actors can completely fall apart. At the same time, you can kind of do the opposite. There's a way to have juxtaposition in what your framing is saying versus what is going on in the story too. But that's something that you discuss with the director.
Sure.
Like you frame it comedically, and you see this all the time with really dark comedies. You make a funny frame, and I say funny frame as in maybe it's a wide angle lens close up, but then something brutal happens, something horribly violent happens in this funny frame. But that's playing into maybe the dark comedy drama aspect of that story. This is all years and years of practice and watching other people's work and kind of just knowing some rules of cinematography and how all that can play together to serve the story that you've been given.
And you've had so much success to this point, and you're now working on some, major shows like Grey's Anatomy. We'll get into that. But what do you think your unique way of telling a story is that has allowed you to kind of, work your way to where you're at now? What do you bring personally?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one because I do know that I've had some people tell me that they can tell when it's something that I've shot.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not really sure what it is about it that they're actually seeing. I think it's hard for me to step back
Okay.
and look at it and go, oh yeah, that's something that I would frame it that way. Or yeah, I would light it that way. I can, but other people seem to recognize it, that I guess I do have a style that I don't really see myself.
Sure.
Um, so I do know that one thing that has helped me in my career is that I have been able to pull off a lot with very little. Just coming from mostly independent, lower budget projects, you have to be, you really have to think outside the box. You have to be inventive. You got to figure out ways to pull off a bigger budget look with a lot less.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can do that, it will serve your career, will help you out. And especially if you're doing it on time and you're finishing early,
Mm-hmm.
you're not overworking your crew too much. All of those aspects also play into it, not just the fact that it looks good, but if you're also pleasing the producers, pleasing the director, then that also helps with your career.
Sure. Yeah.
And so I think that's part of it too, is not that I just have a style to the look of my work. It's also just what I've been able to pull off with very little.
I think what's also really fascinating about your position is kind of the like complexity between, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, between having to be at times kind of in charge and managing people and being very tactical with what you do, have this go here, have this go there, in a high pressure situation where you need to get the shot, you have a time frame, you have a budget, but then also having to stay really creative and true to the creative vision of the director. How do you manage that balance?
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably the hardest part about it, because you want to maintain visual integrity,
Hmm.
but at the same time you are being a manager of really the budget at hand. You can't sit there forever and tweak lighting and the AD's looking at their watch saying, we're going to lose our actor in 10 minutes. Can you
Yeah,
stop tweaking the lighting now? It's all of that management of knowing what to let go, knowing what is acceptable, knowing what shots to fight for. And in many ways, I'm constantly thinking about the time in my head too. And luckily, when I start working with ADs and they start to get to know me and they see the way that I work, they let if I start tweaking a little bit longer, they know that I'm doing it for a reason.
hmm,
And they know that I'm thinking about how I will catch up maybe on the next scene, because I'm thinking about all those puzzle pieces of the day of this scene is really important. It's the main part of the story. I need to put a little more focus into it. I know the next scene, I'm not going to say a throwaway. There's never a throwaway scene, but I don't need to put as much energy into it. And so I'm always balancing that of what does the day include and how can I balance my creativity within that.
yeah,
So that's really kind of what it is. Like sometimes I will sit there and people are like, why is she taking so long on this shot? And I've even had producers come in and standing over my shoulder going, what's going on? What's going on? And I always have to say, I got you. I got you.
sure.
I know this is taking a little bit long, but I swear the next scene is going to fly. And they've also gotten used to me too. And they look at me and they're like, okay.
Sure. And I could just imagine that's a tough balance to strike all the time, and it's sort of a feel thing and getting used to the people you're working with. Do you remember the time when you started to feel the confidence in yourself and what you were doing to be able to tell a director, hey, I need a little bit more time? Or, do you remember a moment, or do you remember that time when you had the confidence on set to take control with things like that?
Yeah. It's weird because the confidence, it's funny because I was literally just on a conference call a couple of days ago, and I was talking about how every day I go into set, or not every day, but sometimes I go, do I really know what I'm doing here?
Right.
And you have to remind yourself, yes, you know what you're doing. You haven't forgotten how to light,
Uh-huh.
just go with your gut. You know what's going on. But I feel like, for me, the confidence as in saying this is what we need to do, otherwise, it's not going to serve the story, I feel came pretty early on.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that I started developing that even when I was at AFI. I felt like I was fighting for shots, even then. And because you have to, if you don't fight for the artistry of your work, then you're not going to get good work out of it. But once again, it's kind of the pick your battles. And even when I was at AFI, there were certain scenes that I put a lot of attention into, and they took a little bit longer. And other scenes I didn't, because I knew that I didn't need to do that for that particular moment of the story. And even if you're just watching movies that are out, television, big TV shows, you'll see too that there's some of those scenes that are, oh my gosh, they put every bit of artistry and all their budget into the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And there's another scene where it's just two people talking in over the shoulder shots. And that was probably one that they sped through a little bit. They didn't put as much time into. So it's always knowing those scenes that you can put a little bit more artistry into. And I feel like I was getting that very early on, and knowing to ask for that. And you hope that the directors and the producers trust that aspect of it.
Yeah.
And most of the time they do. If you have a good producer, a good AD, and I say AD as an assistant director, they're the ones that are always watching the time and making sure that we stay on schedule, just in case you didn't know what I'm talking about when I said AD.
I figured, but yeah, thank you for clarifying.
Yeah. So the assistant director is always the one that is trying to keep us on schedule. And for the most part, that a lot of these will be discussions in pre-production anyway. Like when we're looking at the schedule and they ask me, do you think you can do this in one day? If they've put 4 scenes together that are all really complicated, I will flat out tell them it's going to be a long day. If you want to do those 4 scenes together, you're looking at 14 hours. I'm just saying. And they'll go, okay, yeah, we get it, but we only have this actor this one day. So they talk to the producers about it. It's probably going to be a 14-hour day. Are you guys okay with this? And it's a discussion, hopefully in pre-production anyway.
Okay.
I'm not really deciding on the day, oh, this is an important scene, I'm going to take longer to light this.
Right. It should be before, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, you've definitely, earned people's trust throughout your career, leading to now you being the director of photography for Grey's Anatomy. You've worked on some great independent films and feature films. And so, first of all, congratulations on that. I know, is it this upcoming season you are the sole director of photography for the whole season?
We'll still have rotating. So I was an alternating DP this past season.
Okay.
And we're also going to have alternating DPs this next season too. And in case you're wondering what that is, for an alternating DP position, one DP takes an episode, and then the next DP takes the next episode, and then you rotate that way. And that gives you the opportunity to have prep time with the director before you start your episode. So that's what I'll be doing again on the next season is alternating with another cinematographer.
That's great.
Yeah.
So congratulations on that. And maybe, I know it's, I'm sure, a long and winding path, but could you give us a little sense of how this came about to where you're in the position you are in now with them?
Sure. It felt like an overnight success, but it's not. My husband often says, "Oh yeah, you're a 17-year overnight success," because that's what it looks like. Because I went from independent, low budget to all of a sudden I'm shooting network TV. So it looks like I just got a huge bump in my career. But what had happened was in 2018, I had won an emerging cinematographer award through the union.
Mm-hmm.
And I was still an operator at the time in the union. And with that award, it opened up some paths to some bigger jobs. And the first one was For the People, which is a Shonda Rhimes show. They were looking for an additional cinematographer and a C camera operator. And what I mean by additional cinematographer is sometimes when a DP is the sole DP on a show, they still need time to go prep. They need to go location scout sometimes. They often have on main television shows double up days. So as one show is ending, one episode is ending, another one is starting on the exact same day. So that helps with keeping the schedule a little bit tighter, and also the release dates coming out on time.
Okay.
On those double days, they also need another DP to run that set. So they were looking for someone who was coming from being a union camera operator that could bump up to being an additional cinematographer. Now, when they were looking for that position, they had called the union. Do you know someone that would be interested in taking this position? And Stephen Poster, our president at the time of the union, said you should really look into potentially some of our ECA recipients. Passed my name along. I had actually worked with that DP that was going to be shooting For the People. So it was just kind of a perfect storm of events that I had worked with him. He's like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, I worked with her. Let's interview her." So I landed that position. So working a whole season on For the People led to a connection with Grey's Anatomy, because at the end of their season 15, they were needing another DP to shoot standalone episodes. So they had 2 standalone episodes that needed to be simultaneously shot while main unit of Grey's Anatomy was also being shot.
Okay.
And so since For the People had just wrapped, they called me, thought I might be interested in shooting these episodes. Of course I was.
Mm-hmm.
So it had the chance of shooting 2 full-length Grey's Anatomy episodes from season 15. They liked the work that I did. And then the following year, they were looking for a new alternating DP anyway, and they asked me to take the position. So, yeah, it was kind of crazy how that happened.
There's a moment in season 4 of HBO's hit crime show, The Wire, when Detective Monk walks up to a crime scene and turns to Detective Greggs, who he's mentoring, and says, "You know what you need at a crime scene? Soft eyes. If you got soft eyes, you can see the whole thing." The term soft eyes is one that has been studied, written about, and sought as a way of seeing the big picture, of widening your lens and taking in all that a scene has to offer. A Native American term for it is looking without looking. On the other hand, the term hard eyes has been used to describe that pointed, laser-like focus or stare where every detail is thoroughly examined. The kind of eyes my wife gives me when I eat the last bit of ice cream from the freezer and don't tell her. As a director of photography, Alicia Robbins has steadily built a career and reputation for her ability to use both sets of eyes in her work. That balancing act of understanding the greater vision of a director or a scene and how it plays into the film as a whole, while at the same time working meticulously on the smallest of details, getting the lighting on an actor's face just right so that emotional line really hits home. And how important it is to be able to do both, to be able to see where all the puzzle pieces fit together to create a work of art like a movie scene. To return to The Wire, as Detective Lester Freeman puts it, quote, "We're building something here. We're building it from scratch. All the pieces matter." Could you give us a sense of what it's like working within the set on a Grey's Anatomy episode?
Yeah. You wake up really early. That's the first thing. You're up at 5 a.m. Usually it's a 7 a.m. call. And I'll kind of just run through, because it's repetition is what happens. So for each scene, there's a certain way that each scene is run. The first thing that happens when you get to set is the actors do just a read through of the lines. They're not blocking at all. They're sitting there with the director. I'm usually not participating in that part. I'm still getting breakfast.
Yeah.
That's my one moment when they're reading lines that I can actually go to craft service. So I usually take advantage of that. So they just do a line read through. If they have any questions about what the content is, what the line read is, the writer is always there too, so that if they have a question about a line, they can ask the writer. After they go through the line read through, and sometimes that can be really quick. It can be 5-7 minutes. Then they start working out the blocking. Usually the director already has something in mind of how they want the actors to move through the space. Sometimes the actors have their own opinion about where they feel might be right too. Also, there's a lot of things that go into that. A lot of medical aspects go into it. We have medical producers and supervisors on set that say, well, they probably wouldn't do that at that time because this would be happening with this piece of equipment or whatever it is. So there's definitely other voices that can come in with just that, the blocking aspect of it. Once the director feels like it's blocked out, usually I'll be watching that, because if I start seeing something weird happening with this person is now blocked and they're right against a wall, it might be difficult for me to light or get a camera angle in a position that looks well. And before we bring in everyone to what they call marking rehearsal, I'll ask the director, hey, can we at least move their mark just a little bit so that they're not right up against that wall, or they're not right under that weird lamp, whatever it is. So then the next thing that happens is a marking rehearsal. And that's where the whole crew comes in. They watch the actors go through the scene with their blocking. They're laying, camera assistants are laying down tape marks for where they've been standing. And then we release the main actors to go back to hair and makeup or their trailer. And now the set is essentially mine at that point.
Okay.
So the director and I talk about, okay, what shots do we think that we want to see? The director might say, well, I really do want a big wide shot for this moment. So let's look at this. I'll bring some lenses out. We'll look at some framings. We'll figure out the placement of the cameras. And then once that happens, usually the director will let me now light the set, land the cameras where they need to be, figure out what kind of contraptions we need to move the cameras, whether or not that's going to go on a jib arm. Is it going to be just on the dolly with what we call dance floor? They lay down a big floor. And now I have the set for probably about 20 minutes. roughly,
Okay.
depending on the size of the scene. I have it for about 20 minutes for lighting. And now I'm working with the gaffer, camera operators, to make all that happen. After that's done, we're doing this with stand-ins. So these are people that look similar to our main actors, and they're going through all the marks with cameras so we can decide on whether or not it's working with the lighting and the framing. And then once we feel good there, we bring the actors in for a rehearsal and we shoot it. Hence why I don't really get a break, because everyone else has like a moment where they can like get away. But the only moment I ever have to actually get away is when they're going through that line reading of the next scene. So that's my escape.
Now that you're working with Grey's Anatomy, how drastic, or is there a drastic difference between working on that set as opposed to some of the other sets you've worked on, the independent films and things like that?
Yeah, for me, it's a drastic difference. But I think that's also because I went from really micro, low budget films to now a budget that is one of the bigger budgets for television shows out there. I think for maybe other DPs, it might not be as much of a drastic change because they might be coming from independent features that are still considered low budget independent, but they're still union. They still have a full crew. They still probably have a lot of the equipment that they may need, but mostly it's just people are getting paid lower rates.
Okay.
Whereas I was coming from like the last feature, and this is what I think is so funny. The feature I did right before I started For the People was shot entirely out of a cargo van. So all my lighting, camera, everything was out of a cargo van. So it was micro budget independent film that I was doing. So for me, going from that to now full crew, several 10-ton trucks whenever we go on location, it was a drastic difference for me. And just having really skilled professional crew that have been working for years, if not decades, was quite a change for me.
Yeah.
And I like doing both. That's a funny thing too. Sometimes I really like getting down and dirty again and just having a few crew members and being creative, but it does take a huge weight off when you know that you have all the resources necessary to get the framing that you need from the cinematography. So
yeah,
it's been nice.
Have you, and you mentioned something a couple seconds ago about liking to still go back and do some of these lower budget or smaller type of projects, but has working now on Grey's Anatomy, or just getting to this point in your career in general, has it changed the type of projects or people that you will take chances to work with? Have you gotten like better at saying no, I guess, to certain things than earlier on?
Absolutely. I think before I was taking pretty much anything that would come my way, provided that I liked the people that I was working with. It almost didn't matter the size of the budget if I liked the people and I liked the story that we were shooting. Now, even if I like the people and I like the story, unfortunately, if it is micro budget, I'm probably not going to do it. Mostly just because it's backbreaking work. It really is. That last feature that I did that was out of a cargo van, I only had 3 crew members to shoot that entire feature. And it's physically exhausting. And I'm just not at that. I'm not 25 anymore. I can only handle that so much. And so I feel like I'm more at that point where I need to have more crew members. I shouldn't have to be hauling equipment myself. I shouldn't have to be doing literally the heavy lifting of equipment. So I've kind of put my foot down on those kind of budgets.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fair to say, for sure. How do you continue to stay creative in your line of work? I mean, someone like yourself, is it reading? Is it watching other movies or films? How do you do it?
A lot of it is watching other films and TV shows. If I'm sometimes I'll be watching a TV show, and it's not like I can't change, for instance, like Grey's Anatomy, I can't change the look of the show because that would get me fired if all of a sudden I'm making Grey's
Right.
Anatomy look like Legion. So, but there's ways to maybe incorporate some framing that might be fun to play with, and it's always a discussion with the director.
Hmm.
Luckily, with Grey's Anatomy this past year, I shot 3 of the standalone episodes, and those are supposed to have a little bit of a different look to them anyway because they're usually location based. So those episodes, I was able to be a little bit more, I don't want to say creative because I'm getting to be creative on a daily basis on that show, but I got to push it a little bit for some new visual designs that maybe they hadn't seen before. And so that was kind of where I got to flex that muscle a little bit of
Cool.
trying some new pieces of equipment, some new filtration, new lenses, even new lighting. So I got to do that with some of those standalone episodes. But yeah, on the main unit episodes where we're at the hospital, the show has a certain look, and so you have to make sure that you're at least keeping it consistent from episode to episode. But there's always some artistry involved, like whether or not it's trying a new light coming from that you're using as their key light, and you're playing with that. It might not look different to the audience's eye, but it's a chance for me to play with a new tool and see how it looks with faces. So a lot of the artistry that people might not see just watching the show, I'm practicing some stuff on my own.
Okay. What about just the future of film or of your career? What are some things that excite you, whether it be new technology or new ways to shoot things? What's exciting about what's going on?
Yeah. Of course, I don't know when you're going to release this podcast, but right now it's hard to know exactly what to be excited about because we also don't know how much the industry is going to have to change with the current quarantine situation, social distancing. With sets, you have hundreds of people on set at any given time. Between crew and background, you can have hundreds of people there. So one thing I've been thinking about a lot is how can we still have that same imagery without actually having all of those people there? And there might be situations in the future where we're having to create virtual environments for people so that our lead actors, for instance, aren't necessarily always in the scene with the 100 background that are also in the scene. We might have to start framing things where we've already shot the background moving in the frame as a plate, so to speak, and then position our actors in front of a green screen without those 100 people behind them.
Okay.
So this is actually where my head's at right now, is trying to figure out ways that we're still going to be able to shoot a show like this with all of these people, but not actually have all those people together at the same time. But that in general is always exciting to me anyway. There's so many virtual sets that are being used in films anyway. One of the films that I actually did work on was Creed 2. And it was my husband and I that shot all of the huge arena crowd plates that they dropped in the background for those fight sequences in Creed 2. When you watch Creed, you would never know that they only have 100 or so people just surrounding the ring, and the rest of it is completely surrounded by green screen, because the visual effects company did just an amazing job at dropping in those background plates. But like my husband and I, we had to travel to several different really big boxing matches and shoot from inside the ring at a commercial break to capture those 360 environments of those massive audiences that they use later in Creed 2.
Wow.
So we're already going that direction a little bit of not having to shoot everything in the actual space. And I think that's fascinating, just like what Mandalorian did with their LED backgrounds for the environments. That technology, I think, is it's really appealing to me. And I think that we're going to be moving that direction even more.
Okay, that's good. Well, be interesting to see how that plays out. We won't be releasing this podcast too far in the future, so I think your predictions will still be valid at that point. Have you had a moment in your career where you've gotten to work with someone, whether it be a producer or a writer, that you've kind of had to like keep it together on the inside, but you're like, I can't believe I'm getting the chance to work with this person? Has there been a moment or two where you've really felt that?
Yeah, actually that happened. That happened when I was working as a 3D rig technician on Planet of the Apes.
Okay.
I've never really been starstruck by anybody, but I knew that Andy Serkis was our lead gorilla ape. They're apes. And I hadn't seen him yet on set. And I knew he was supposed to be there on this one day, and I hadn't worked with him yet, but I hadn't seen him, and I wasn't sure when he was supposed to come to set. And he arrived on set on one of those Arabian horses. And he was in his full like mocap suit and everything. And I was standing there, and all of a sudden I heard this horse like coming up behind me, and I turned around, and it's Andy Serkis, and he's just riding by, and he's looking down at me like it just the like king of apes. And I'm going, and my jaw just dropped. I couldn't say anything. I just had my mouth wide open. I was just staring at him.
That's
I probably look like such an idiot. And I know he's probably like, who is this person? Why are they looking at me like that?
Yeah.
But I was awestruck by him because I just think he's an amazing actor. And yeah, I've never really been starstruck by other actors, but seeing Andy Serkis right up on one of those Arabian horses.
That's good. That's a good story. I like that.
Yeah.
Well, good. So, looking back, what's some advice you might give to your younger self just starting out in this industry?
Oh, wow. Well, to my younger self would be not to give myself such a hard time about the timeline of when things happen. I know that when I graduated AFI, I expected certain things to start lining up within certain years.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that certain breaks would happen in my career by a certain age. And I think that can be really crippling. It can also be really discouraging if you're not reaching those goals by that point. Because everyone's timeline for succeeding is going to be different. You have some people that make it really early and they're very lucky, and they're probably very talented as well, but there's a lot of luck involved. It's a lot of the stars lining up the right way to get your break. So if you're passionate about the art that you are creating, you just have to keep doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point, it might break for you or it might not. And you have to also be comfortable with that too. You have to be comfortable knowing that you might be pursuing this art form your whole life and never get your break. But are you still finding something fun with it? Are you still happy doing it? And I'll tell you the truth, literally right before I got my break, I remember having this conversation with my husband because I was doing like working with him on the Creed stuff and working with his company. And I was also getting to do still my independent projects and being creative. And I remember telling him, you know what? I'm pretty happy. I feel good about things. It's all right if this doesn't actually take off from me. I feel good. And he was like, that's great. I'm so proud of you. And it was literally a month later that I got called with the ECA award, and then right after that getting the Shonda Rhimes show. I mean, it's crazy how all of a sudden you become at peace with being happy with where you are, and it could just turn on a dime for you.
It's amazing. And going back to what you said earlier about your husband, or you joking about being a 17-year overnight success. But to your point, like you said, so much work went in beforehand. Now you're looking back at things and having a different perspective on it. But very well said. Thank you for that too. I think that all of us, and doesn't matter their career, have those moments of like, okay, how much longer do I keep sticking with this? Or, and then you get a little bit of a hook here, and you're like, okay, I'll keep going. And like you said, if you love what you do, then it doesn't feel like work all the time.
Exactly.
What's one, and these last two questions I ask every guest. What's one of the best investments that you've made in your career?
Investment. I think for me, it was finally investing in some camera gear. That sounds just so cliche and silly, but it is true. Because I feel like in order to practice your craft, you got to have something to practice with.
Sure. Yeah.
And there wasn't always the time where I could just go rent something to play with the gear. And it didn't matter that what I had purchased was an inexpensive camera. That didn't matter. It gave me an opportunity also to take extra jobs that I wouldn't have maybe been able to take before, because they were lower budget jobs. It's like, for instance, just going to shoot an interview with somebody. That might not pay very well at all. They're looking for someone that owns their own gear, that can go shoot an interview. But it gave me that opportunity to go do that job because I owned this inexpensive camera gear. Mm-hmm. It also introduced me to some more people. Now I'm meeting these people that I'm doing these interviews for. So just purchasing something that was in line with my craft, I think helped a lot. And not only that, but because I purchased a camera that wasn't like the top of the line, I had to learn how to make that camera look great. And that's difficult. So then when finally you do get the Cadillac or the Lamborghini of cameras, it's so much easier. Yeah. It's so much easier. So owning something that pertains to your craft, I think, is really important.
Sure. Yeah, that's so true. That's a great answer. Definitely. Makes me think of my first guitar I ever bought, was the first one I ever learned on was someone let me borrow it, their old guitar from the friend of a friend, and I just learned on that. And then I bought, a starter guitar and got better and better and better. And then I think once my career got to a point where it's like, okay, I'm going to invest in a really nice guitar, it was like, wow. I mean, like you said, it was a lot easier because I had put in the work on the beat up one from the garage all those years. Yep. What brings you the most joy in what you do?
It's really being surrounded by the people, I think. I love when I have a great crew, when I have a great director and producers, and when I'm just surrounded by everyone who's working for that common goal of creating a good story. There's nothing like it. And especially when you're seeing it come together on that monitor, you can see the story that you guys are all talking about and it's actually working. That's really powerful to be a part of that.
Wow, what a great episode. We thank Alicia for coming on. Please follow her at aliciarobbins.com, as well as check out all of her work on this upcoming season of Grey's Anatomy. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast, pass it along, share it with your friends. We really appreciate it. As always, whatever you're doing, wherever you are, keep making that beautiful work. We'll see you next time.